All right, I know we're getting close to lunch here, so bear with us. I think this is using a bad reference, a meaty topic. That's something you can chew on.
Oh.
Yes, I knew it. So let's, I know we've already met Hilmon and JR, so I'm going to let Tyson do a quick intro.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's Goeltz. It's a tough one. It's a tough German name, but it's Goeltz. And I'm the CRO of Reprise. Reprise is here rocking our colorful purple shirts right outside. We're a demo experience platform. We help go-to-market professionals create winning demos. And I've been the CRO for somewhere between 2 to 3 months. Prior to that, I spent nearly a decade at LinkedIn and another ed tech startup here in Austin called A Cloud Guru. So excited to be with you all.
All right. Awesome. I'm Steve. And I'm Jeff Ha here, the Chief Go-to-Market Officer for Rev. So trying to take what we learned in our last session. If you're feeling very low confident in your ideal customer profile, come and talk to me. Maybe I can help. So gentlemen, let's get started with, before we dive in, I always like to do just a small little icebreaker. So I call this rapid fire. Don't think too hard, just give me a quick response.
Not a problem.
Don't think too hard. All right. So we'll just kind of go down this line here very quickly. I have a few different options in terms of questions. So you'll see how this works. So JR and the group, bagel or donut?
Donut. Easy.
Bagel. I grew up in New York.
Bagel.
All right. Top Gun, original or Maverick?
Original.
Original.
Original all day.
All right. Old school or new age?
Old school.
Old school, for
Old
sure.
school.
New York style or Chicago style?
Boston style.
New York style.
Chicago, baby.
All right. You're going to love this, JR. Favorite swear word? Go for it.
Wow.
Go for it.
I love a good F word, man.
All right.
I say shit all the time. You'll probably hear that a few times in my afternoon session.
Bollocks.
Oh, wow. All right. All right. And last one, Houston or Philly?
Philly. Hard to say for me. Philly.
Mets fan, so I'm Houston here.
Cubs fan, don't care.
Oh, wow. All right. All right. Very good. Okay, so let's dive into this topic of accountability in a remote work environment. And now, I guess the first kind of perspective is around, I think as managers sometimes we feel like we're in this whole life balance, right? And trying to balance accountability with work and life balance. And we feel like, can those two coexist, right? Are we infringing on each other's territory if we're just trying to push too hard on accountability? So let's start there, right? So maybe, Hilmon, what do you think about work-life balance and how to kind of weave in accountability?
So it's an interesting question. I think of work-life balance from the vantage point of if you align with your passion, then the balance comes. And I know that's not necessarily always true of folks who might be earlier in their careers, where you're kind of trying to discover what it is that you want to do, and you might be testing out some things that pay the bills that may not be, oh, this is the panacea that I want to be spending the rest of my life doing. So that may not be fair. In the context of accountability, I think that if you're looking at accountability, it's your ability to explain, justify, and be responsible for the things that you've been appointed to do. I don't think that it's an unreasonable expectation of someone who's collecting a paycheck to have to meet those 3 requirements of their job function. And I'm not sure that it transcends the space of work-life balance necessarily. It's the work part, right? The balance stuff comes later. That's just my high-level opinion.
How about you, Tyson?
I go back to the word balance, and what the visual that comes to mind is something that goes like this, but it stays on a relative equilibrium at times. And I think a word that I like arguably better than there is harmony, is work-life harmony. How do I make 2 competing things work together, complement each other? How that ebbs and flows can change for the individual. I know plenty of individuals that have been able to hold themselves accountable and deliver on work, working what someone would think an alternative or radical approach to work. But again, if you're accountable to the outcome, let's architect a way for you to be successful in the constructs of collaborating with a large group of people and ultimately getting shit done. So I like harmony better than balance because I think it provides more flexibility for the individual.
Right. So JR, you mentioned old school, right, as your choice there when we did this little rapid fire. And, there's a generational gap when you think about, I just hired an SDR, and she's 2 decades younger than me, right, which scares me, right, because I even know what motivates this person and what they care about. So, and I know there's lots of leaders out there that, are in my situation where they're decades apart, and there's middle management that might be 10 years apart, and now you have your young SDR. So there's a generational gap happening. How do we reconcile that? How do we take our old school mentality that maybe probably this panel has, but also realize that there's a kind of a different perspective?
Yeah, I think it's tough. Like the word balance, I struggle with balance myself. I have a tattoo on my rib cage that says, how you do anything is how you do everything. So as my mom says, J.I., you don't have a dimmer. Like it's on or off for me. But, with the younger generation, there is a little bit more of expectation of like being able to do other things and have that time. But I go back to like, all right, well, what are your goals? And, I talk to young Gen Z kids every single day. That's who we work with. And they all say like, oh, I want to make $500,000 a year as a salesperson. And I just remind them, I'm like, all right, well, you don't that's not a 40-hour-a-week job. So if that's seriously what you want to do, this is how you're going to get there, and this is what you need to put in. And you can do it on your own time for sure, and that's one of the things about sales that's great. But initially, you're going to have to really work a little bit of extra hours and put in extra time. So I think it's constantly going back to like what their goals are, what their why is, and then reminding them of that when they're complaining about the amount of time and work that they're putting in. So it's tying their goals to what actually it takes to get to those goals.
Right. So expectations needs to happen at the recruiting process.
100%. Yep.
Right, which is what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah.
Tyson, what about this whole notion in the past we had boiler rooms where these SDRs or BDRs would hang together, and there was a lot of benefit from that type of environment where osmosis, right? You can hear the conversations, and I had the same thing. And my experience with those rooms was their peers taught each other a lot more than I can teach. And now we just don't have that, right, in this remote world. And then that really helps with accountability. But when you take this away, how do we make up for that in this new environment?
I do miss those moments. And as more of an introvert, sometimes those environments overwhelm me personally. And I know for other BDRs or sellers that are that way as well, it can be as well. But you do learn a ton. And I read something recently. It was that most social policing of behaviors and norms actually comes from peers. It's not the leader dictating the norm. It's actually the social policing of your peers. You hear something, you see something, you react to it. It becomes kind of the tribal instinct to do that thing. And we've lost that. And I think that the challenge today is we're trying to solve problems in a remote world in the way that we used to try to solve them in a physical world. You can't solve that thing. Bringing them together in a virtual Zoom room is not going to accomplish the same thing. So full stop. It's a thing we can do, but it's not the whole thing. I think we have to be more thoughtful. We have to provide more direction. We can't assume that people get in the room and start doing the work. Clarity and communication, I think, are so much more important now than they were before because the lines of ambiguity are so thick today. And you can find people sitting on this lonely island of virtual world where they don't know what to do, they don't know what good looks like, we haven't communicated clear expectations and guidelines, and that's a pretty shitty place, number 2 or 3, to be in. So we as leaders, we need to lean into that much, much more.
Got it. So Hilmon, can technology replace some of the kind of benefits we used to have when we were in a closer
Well, I mean, hasn't
world?
it? Aren't people still dating? Aren't people still friends with people? Aren't people still identifying, what they want to do on a week? I mean, yeah, obviously, right? I think that Tyson makes a great point, which is that you have to let go. You can't say like, oh, how do we make it what it once was? And I mean, I grew up in the boiler rooms too. It was awesome. Well, actually, it wasn't awesome at the time. I hated it. But in hindsight, it was really beneficial for my career, and it probably sped up a lot of learning, a lot of failing, a lot of other things that I got to observe and be part of. And it's gone. But I also didn't grow up with a phone that has massive amounts of information, the ability for me to connect with people and stay in contact with people. I didn't grow up with automation tools and things like Slack and collaboration and ways in which I could have a virtual conversation with somebody with a script. I mean, like, let's move. But the point is, to Tyson's point, like, it's not about reframing what was. It's about crafting your organization in a way that deals with what is. It's much the same way. I mean, we're talking about sales, right? So who is sitting there saying, gosh, I really miss being able to go to an office and look at the lobby and go to see 10 different companies and just ring the bell and get in and sit down and talk to a CEO. I mean, that train has left, right? You don't do that. You don't go walking around anymore. It's a waste of time in that you've got scale right now to meet people in different ways and to engage with folks and do cool things like we just saw in the previous presentation of storytelling. So I think that if we let go and realize the cheese has moved and that there are other ways, and we're also dealing in many ways, and I will say one thing, you mentioned having an SDR team that's 2 decades younger. There are also awesome SDRs that may be 2 decades older than you right now that are in the workplace doing this stuff. So being able to be adaptive and create ways that adapt to your culture and integrate folks both for their own progressive growth path as well as for the job to be done, I think are critical, and that's the job of management.
Got it. Jerry, in your recruiting, how, going back to expectations, like what kind of expectations do you set with candidates knowing the fact that they're going to be in a remote work environment? How do you set them up for success, and what coaching do you have for them?
Well, I think one of the big things, we ask initially, and this is something that we train them on how to think about, is like, why do you want to do technology sales? And initially, the answer is like 80% of the time, one of the answers is because I want to work remote. And we have a course around like why that's not a good answer. It's like people want to get into technology sales because it's flexible and you can work remote, you can build your own schedule, you can go to your kids' soccer practices, and that's great. But my belief is like that flexibility is really earned. So especially with this audience that focuses on sales development, I think we set the tone to say, hey, you are going to have flexibility, but you're still going to have a lot of work to do, right? So you can do the work from 6 to 9 p.m. Certain things, obviously you can't call people then. Some people do. But it's really about saying like, hey, there's flexibility, but there's a lot of work to do. And if you really want to get to the goal that you told me of, being a $500,000 seller, then this is what it's going to take. So it's really, again, going back to the expectations. And I think the thing that Tyson said from a company side perspective that's most important is thoughtfulness. Like you have to be thoughtful about what you're doing with a remote workforce. And it needs to be something that you're working on every single week with intention. That's the most important piece of it.
Got it. So Tyson, I think in one of our earlier conversations while we were prepping for this, you had a phrase that really struck with me, which was, this is a difficult time to have difficult conversations. And I want to unpack that a little bit, right? Because I think we all know here, I think for lots of us, our companies are struggling with the economic headwinds, right? And folks aren't hitting quota, right? They're not hitting the targets that maybe we set out for them at the beginning of the quarter. So now the conversation has to happen. But I know in the back of our mind, I know for me too, is my SDR could bail on me, right? And the effort I've just put in to ramp this SDR, they go and find another company, and it's kind of like this, kind of carousel. How do we have those conversations in this current time where we're apprehensive to have that conversation as well? Like, what advice do you have for us?
Yeah, and show of hands, who agrees difficult conversations are more difficult now than maybe they were? Right? They're always going to be hard. It's a different version of hard now. And I think they're harder now because there's so much more onus on us to establish what good looks like up front and then manage people to that goodness throughout the course of the period. Now, a difficult conversation will be difficult. It should be less difficult if you've been working with them along the way. So there's the onus on leadership. Am I having a difficult conversation because I've avoided the smaller difficult conversations over time, or am I having a difficult conversation because it's a difficult outcome, but that person knows exactly the journey that we've been on, right? And you don't get the social proof. You can't feel people's energy in a room when they're calling or they're working with customers and what they're doing. You have to be more present, you have to be more intentional with where you spend your time so you can feel how they're reacting and you can observe what they're doing. I'll go back to the word observation, which I think is really key. We've lost that a lot in this remote world, so you have to do more to make sure that the feedback you're delivering is objective as possible. It's really easy to fall into, I feel like you're not doing this well. Easy to combat that. That's an opinion. Or I'm observing you doing these things that are not leading to optimal outcomes. That's a much less difficult conversation to have. Whether it's like football. I'm observing you in practice throwing the ball and you're not hitting the target. Versus your completion percentage is low. I think you're not throwing the ball very well. Well, no, JR, there's a lot of other things at play here. So you got to tee yourself up to have a less difficult conversation with objectivity, setting clear guidelines, and making sure that you're avoiding that I think statement.
Hilmon, anything on your end?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, did you see my face? I was thinking about something there. I keep looking at this accountability, and one thing that I think that we're over-indexing on, that Tyson was alluding to, is that we're thinking of accountability from the standpoint of the IC. And they need to be doing stuff, and we need to be sure that they're active, and we need to be sure that they're doing this, that, and the other. But accountability runs both ways. There's a dual accountability. There's so often that I talk to folks who are younger who might ask me, hey, should I take this job? And they'll say, well, what are the expectations? And they've got, some baseline expectations that come from a job description. And they say, well, what does that boil down to? What does the comp look like, and how do you get there? And they're like, well, here's the comp, and I got to do this, and I got to do that, and I got to do the other, and I got to do the blah, blah, blah. And I go, okay, but so how have they proven to you that this is reasonable, that you can actually attain this? And then how are they going to support you in that effort? And what's the previous indication that this is, what's the previous history that shows that this is actually viable? And they're like, didn't ask that. And I'm like, go ask that. See if they can answer that question. And part of the reason is, as a candidate, you need to be working with an organization that's accountable, not an organization that's just living in a spreadsheet and, appeasing the board of directors or the VCs and saying, oh, we're going to scale and we're going to do this, and we're going to get this many, leads, and they're going to convert, and well, what's the history behind that? So I think that as leadership, and as a lot of us in this room, are managing folks, we are accountable to their success. It's not just this carrot and stick of like, let's hold them down and let's make sure they're going to get this thing done. It's like, are we creating an environment that's conducive to success? Whether it's the numbers, whether it's the collaboration, whether it's the training, whether it's the growth path that they're afforded, whether it's our availability and our time, that's key. And I think that the conversation should be expanded in that respect to kind of fold in, what are we doing? And are we in a space where, with these difficult conversations, I love what Tyson said, it's like sometimes you just put it off. You've known it was coming. You pulled that spreadsheet together at the last minute and it didn't have any veracity behind it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
JR, we'll end with you here, which is, when you reach that point where that difficult conversation needs to happen, right? And I know some companies might actually are at that point right now, and they're trying to decide, should we kind of sacrifice and keep this SDR because we know the value that they can provide when times are better versus, gosh, it's just not, we just can't, right? What are your thoughts on that? Like, how should they think about it?
So a sales leader early on in my career, my first management job, I had a rep that was kind of in this situation, and he said to me, listen, no breath is better than bad breath. So like, I know everybody's really shocked in this room, but I tend to be like very blunt, right? So I think with my perspective is like, if you really understand what someone's goals are and they're not living up to their side of the accountability, and what Hilmon said about the accountability going both ways, I couldn't agree with more. But if you really understand what someone's trying to accomplish and they're not doing the things to get there, that's how you frame it. Is like really in the context of them. Like, hey, you told me this is what you wanted, and we talked about this is how you're going to get there, and you're not doing this. So, I'm a big like, get rid of them earlier than hold on to them tight.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting times for sure. So audience, we have an all-star cast here for you to have questions, right? What's on your mind about accountability? Way in the back there.
Well, if it's like outcomes versus process, right? If they're following the process, if they're controlling the controllables and things still aren't working, that's a completely different story than if they're not doing the right things to drive the outcome. You can't just focus on the outcome, right? When I say bad breath, it's really the people that aren't controlling the controllables and doing those things. That's what I meant. Yeah, I mean, shocker to use a hockey analogy, right? We're all playing on the same ice right now, right? Zamboni put way too much water down this quarter. So everybody's got to skate a little bit harder, you know? If you set goals and you set expectations and they're not meeting them, then you got to make hard decisions. But the conversation should be less difficult if you're framing it in the framework of what they're trying to accomplish personally.
Yes, sir.
And how do you feel about this when they're hitting their goals in your organization? Find out that they're working together, trying to get that.
They're hitting their goals? I mean, the bottom line is the bottom line, isn't it? There's an ethical issue here, right?
Yeah.
Where if you have clearly stated to someone that this is your one and only job, and you've gotten someone's buy-in around that, then you've got a violation of trust, and that's a whole different issue that has nothing to do with whether or not somebody's hitting their goals, because that type of an ethics violation can transcend even just the work relationship. It might be showing up somewhere else, right? And that's just dangerous for a salesperson to be out there doing that. If, however, you have not been accountable and stated that the expectation here is that this is your one and only employment and they're hitting their numbers, you maybe just need to reset some boundaries there. And I know of people who are doing this right now. I won't say any names, but I certainly know of some people who are doing this and who are killing it for both companies. And they're in positions that afford them the opportunity to do that. Now, an SDR is a different kind of role, right? Because particularly if they're outbound and they're making calls, as opposed to, there are SDRs who are doing more email-oriented things and controlling automated tools, right? I think you can do that very effectively for multiple companies, and there are probably companies that do that right now, that are paid big bucks to do that for multiple companies. If you're making calls, it might be difficult to hit your number, but I don't know what you guys think about that.
I agree with you. I think the outcome matters, but I also think it's important that when we talk about they're hitting their numbers, aka they're hitting their quota, they're hitting their targets, there are more things to the jobs that we have to do every day to be successful than just hitting numbers. Right. So I would look at it, are you hitting your number? Okay, first bar, that's good, but there are likely other things that I have hopefully communicated to you in advance that are important to success in this job. And if you are not collaborating, you are not helping your peers, you are not providing product feedback, like if you're just hitting your numbers but you're not doing these other things, then I would have the question of, can you succeed in this role because I've been clear on what that definition for success looks like? If yes, okay, let's do that. If no, then you're going to have to earn the right to kind of maintain that kind of dual working relationship.
I think there's one thing that you can do to fix a problem like that, which is
Not kneecaps.
not kneecaps.
Involves a hockey stick.
Right.
No, you need better accelerators, right? Like, you hit your goal. Like you don't want to. First of all, don't hire people to get to the number. You should be hiring people that want to blow the number out. Agreed. But you need to be accountable to say, hey, you get to this goal, and then all of a sudden you can do this, right? Then that second, so it should be that you when you get to accelerators, you're going to make more money than hitting your goal at two companies, right? That's where your accountability is.
And then there's team sales, right? Where are you helping out your
Right
fellow
on.
teammates
Yep.
and getting the entire team to the goal, right? So there's lots of things I think you can incentivize to really get their performance in the right place.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question?
I'll give the first example because I talked about it during my talk, but having a team goal. A couple people came up to me after saying, hey, I'm going to go to my boss and talk about that. And it was a BDR, and he's like, I hit my number, and now I'm just setting myself up for next quarter. If we had a team goal, I'd be going to help other people on my team because I'd want to get that extra bonus. So that's one way that I've seen it work. I'll let these guys answer.
Yeah, and much to that, I think, creating kind of a what do we want to be known for, whether it's a BDR team or a sales team, and you have your own rituals, your own things that you do as a smaller unit. Now, it has to connect to the broader company vision. Like there is a mission, vision, values of the company. Those kind of subcultures need to plug into that well. Otherwise, you're misaligned from the company's direction perspective. But I think it's important. You put a name to it. I think that's important. These are the things that we do. These are the things that we embody. And you curate that from the team. You don't tell them as a leader, okay, we're now known as this team, and these are the things we're going to go do. No, you create a conversation around it, and you embody it every day, and you put the right rituals and meetings and things in place to keep it alive every single day. But it has to align to the top.
The only thing that I'd add to that is just ensuring that it's not episodic, that happens like at SKO, and then like it's never discussed again. Our role in leadership is to ensure that we are curating the evidence of that as it occurs, whether that's in Slack, whether that's in team Zooms, whether you've got a hybrid day where everybody comes in, whatever it might be. Just ensuring that folks that alignment is tangible, right? That it's not just the thing that's on the wall, but it's the thing that we do every day. I think it's critical.
Okay, thank you so much, panel. Thank you.
Thank you.